Mr. Raja Ways, um, distinguished invitees, award winners, their family members, representatives of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening, everyone. It's an absolute privilege to be here amidst all of you. I'm acutely mindful that I think the clock is ticking for dinner, so I do not wish to be a party pooper. And that said, but I think I can share a few insights. Ab initio, let me compliment the trajectory of Mr. Raja Ways, whom I have known and have been associated in various events for the past 5 odd years, if I recall correctly. Kudos to him. The fact that, if I heard you right, I think you have sort of logged in about 35 plus events, and now you are bidding to go global by going out into the UAE. I wish you all the very best, and your team as well. What struck me as remarkable about the choice of the award winners is that it is extremely eclectic. You don't see the usual suspects, and no pun intended here. You have a very sort of diverse group of individuals and organizations, and without sort of sounding very pedantic and pejorative, it's truly admirable that when you start recognizing and honoring people who are now emerging, I think that's hugely motivational and inspirational. And so more power to you. And what also was very discernible was the fact that the distaff side, the gender, the women, represented the largest number of recipients. I'm sure this is not an unconscious bias, but I guess it's extremely well deserved. And so compliments to all of you, and more power to women going forward as well. My association with the maritime industry up front and center has been around 11 years. I began as Joint Director General of Shipping in April 2011, served for 4 consecutive years, and back to back I then became Director General of Shipping for the next 2 years in the calendar years 2015 and 2016, before superannuating as Secretary to the Government of India. But preceding that, in my earlier avatar as a member of the Indian Revenue Service, Customs and Excise, I have seen it all at fairly close quarters as to what the maritime industry brings to the table. Of course, there was an occasion where for 7 years I was serving as Joint Director in the Revenue Intelligence Directorate, which generally people dread, but that said, so that's when I remember my first sort of brush with the maritime industry, and that is when I came in contact with the Navy and the Coast Guard, which goes back to the year 1986, and that was at the peak of anti-smuggling operations. I mean, many of you are far younger, and I sound very sort of, very fossilized now, having spent about 40 years plus in the civil service. What I wish to say is, of course, greetings to all of you. There are a few nuances which I don't want to bore you with, but I think it is just as well that I sort of highlight it and leave it as a food for thought. One is the fact that when you look at some of the trends which are emerging very distinctly, and I think they're going to call the shots going forward, and that's very true of the maritime industry as well. One of them is the fact you all, of course, referred to green shipping. And incidentally, I was delighted by, the reference, and this is not to single out any individual winner. The very first recipient was the Tuticorin port. It's wholly coincidental that I was a trustee, a government nominee trustee on that board for about 2.5 years when I was Joint Director General of Shipping. But I'm truly delighted that they have gone 100% digital. And to expect an elephant like a government institution to sort of digitize and automate, it truly speaks volumes about the commitment, passion and drive. I'm sure this is equally true of the private sector as too. So the first strand which sort of strikes me is that you would have heard of the acronym ESG, Environment, Social and Governance. I think this is going to be extremely pivotal to business. Very simplistically put, today companies and a lot of Fortune 500 companies are subscribing to this credo or this philosophy. And this is not just lip service. When people say it's ESG, and it's equated with CSR, far from it. ESG is several notches even beyond that. The reason why I'm trying to highlight this is if you look at the path or the journey of most corporates globally, the ones who have embraced ESG very readily, and several of them saw the trends coming up, emerging, they are the ones who are actually marching ahead. Illustrative is the fact that today, most of them who are listed companies are finding that investors are far more open to subscribing to the share capital of companies who believe in ESG. That's one. Secondly, raising money in the capital markets is that much more comfortable for a company which believes in ESG. So the point I wanted to sort of highlight here is that if you as a shipping company, in whatever incarnation or avatar you may be, a ship owning, a ship management company, etc., please start looking at ESG in whatever moderation and within your own remit and agenda. The second is corporate governance. If you pick up most financial and economic media, you would find that there are horror stories, and I don't want to paint everybody in the same brush. There are horror stories of how companies are getting managed. And mind you, these are all marquee companies, storied, legendary companies. And we have seen it all from the time of Arthur Andersen, going back to the year 2000 when there was a dot-com bust, how a company like Arthur Andersen just folded up and became a thing of the past. And then came, of course, the financial sector meltdown in 2008-9, and then Lehman Brothers. I mean, those of you who follow very closely the financial services sector would know what happened to Lehman Brothers. It just collapsed like a pack of cards overnight. I don't want to single out names lest it sound derogatory, because you could open yourself to defamation as well, but that's not really the case here. The idea is to say that if you believe in managing your companies well, please understand that fundamentally what is pivotal to the success of your company on a sustainable basis is true corporate governance, which means that you will behave in whatever form you are, as a founder, a CMD, an executive chairman, or whatever nomenclature, in being responsible and responsive. And when I mean this, you would not only subscribe to shareholder value addition, which is the traditional mode, right? You want to offer greater value accretion to your shareholders, which is just as well. But now the time has come when you start looking at a larger community of stakeholders, which means that you go beyond your shareholders and identify those stakeholders, which means, let's say, if you've got a factory in a remote location, you start looking at the villages, the communities in proximity, as to how you can spread and that wealth which you can share with someone else. And I'm not saying this in a very exotic or esoteric manner. Please look at the balance sheets and look at the success stories or the failures of companies which have not built in this narrative into their journeys. So this is another thing, good corporate governance. And mind you, today, again, shareholders are extremely wary of putting their money in companies which are not governed well. At the end of the day, this is all about a risk perception, right? So the underlying theme here is that manage your companies well, because if you are in here for a long haul, that is on that assumption, that premise, that you believe that you want to continue and sustain yourself over a period of time, then you might just as well start looking at corporate governance in all the seriousness that it merits. The third is innovation. This is well and truly an age of disruption. And the era going forward in the next 10, if you believe in the story of chips, the power of computing, if you believe in that, every 1.5 years, the power of computing doubles up. The chips get faster, the semiconductor business. Now, that is whether you call it as information technology enabled services, information communication technology, you look at artificial intelligence, robotics, machine learning, whatever, jargon that you can spin. But the simple fact that remains is that the next 20, 30 years will see a dramatic transformation. I don't know whether clearly in our lifetime, and those of you in the generations to follow will well and truly recognize the sheer power of technology, innovation, and disruption. 5 years from now, please mark my words, and this is, and this is not, and I'm not saying it, as if it's my own mantra, but I firmly believe 5 to 10 years from now, the world would have transformed very differently in the way you interact. Take e-commerce, for instance. E-commerce, one never visualized 5, 10 years ago that it would reach the levels that it has reached, scaled up to today. And so there is no getting away from the fact that unless you innovate, you start looking at offering that value addition to your customer. And if you don't offer him or her something new in terms of a user experience, if you're in a logistic industry, for instance, if you don't offer that engagement, that connect with your customer, and that means that you have to constantly start thinking and rethinking what is it that you can bring to the table and offer to the customer to stay engaged with him or her. And that's where you need to start looking at innovation and disruptions. And the sooner you realize, the better for all of you. The next plank which I wanted to share is also the fact that, this is the downside of the industry, and dare I say it's not just confined to the maritime industry. Corruption. We have come for long to accept corruption and bribery as passé, as generally an accepted norm. Honestly, I think this is not the way it ought to be, because you can't say that I'll have a chalta hai attitude or I will embrace it as, this is not the new normal, right? And this is not a cliche again, because we've heard, and this is of course been from time immemorial. But if you truly believe in doing sound, robust business, if you want to adopt a model which is sustainable and over a period of time, then you need to start looking, introspecting, and seeing whether you want to offer as clean, as transparent, as accountable a business model, which means that you should start shunning bribery and corruption. I say this with a certain measure of authority, and I don't want to sound too personal, because one of the hats which I currently wear is as senior advisor to the Maritime Anti-Corruption Network, which is a global international organization based in Copenhagen. I'm the senior advisor for India, and I see this in my engagement for the past 6 months from close quarters as to the extent of the downfall and the rot which has set in with this industry. And I don't want to single this industry out, because this is truly prevalent across all walks of life. And we have been able to intercede in several instances on shore-based corruption by escalating the matters and offering systems changes and business process engineering modifications. So the point I want to leave you with as a thought is that please ask yourself whether you are better served by, engaging in, at the end of the day, the fact remains that, representing as I do formally as a civil servant, corruption is nothing but an abuse of authority. You are invested as a government servant with a trust, you're a trustee for the public at large, and you govern on behalf of the general people. And it is so unfortunate when I look around at And I don't want to say this because we've been the generation past and the newer generations. When I look at a lot of my young colleagues who come into the services, they come with preset mindsets and notion. And I don't want to fault you alone. This is equally true in the public space as well. They come with very preset notions that, okay, in 5 years, I need to get an X amount, and this is what my target is. I want to get posted here. This is the assignment I'm looking for. So, and there is no end to it. The only point I wanted to highlight is that say no to this. Please try and shun it, because at the end of the day, your business will be catastrophic if you continue to embrace this. The other thing which I wanted to say, and I don't want to sound too boring, is just two more elements. One is the ability to manage risks. This is going to be critical to all businesses. The sooner you realize and recognize, identify, where you stand in terms of an exposure, and how through due diligence you will be able to combat and address through risk management techniques, I think that will be key for you to manage your businesses very successfully. Because if you don't understand, recognize and identify risks as they emerge, and if you don't use containment measures in time, then you're doomed as a business going forward. And I'm quite aghast. I serve on a few boards of companies as independent directors. I'm often, when I came in, it's been about 4 years now, I found for the life of me, I never understood, the SEBI, the Securities Exchange Board of India, mandates that there will be some mandatory committees. The audit committee is one mandatory committee. The nomination and remuneration committee is another mandatory committee. But risk management committee is a committee which a company, if it decides, it can have it. So I've never fathomed this as to why, because today risk is so critical and intrinsic to every business, and why it cannot be mandated. So all I wanted to park as a thought for the day is that please be mindful of the risks that emerge, and that's which leads me to the other world. The world is an extremely integrated world. Whether you like it or not, of course, though there are contrarian trends, if you look at the geopolitical scenario, you will find that the World Trade Organization, the WTO as we knew it, is well and truly dead. If you go back to the Marrakesh Agreement of 1995 when WTO was formed, and today we are now, 27 years down the line, most countries do not care for the WTO, which is multilateral trade, and that is what is intrinsic to you as a maritime and logistic industry is no more the force for good that it used to be at one point in time. Each country is now looking to advance its own agenda, usually very unilaterally, and that does not augur well for the industry going forward. So the point there is that what I wanted to highlight here is that if you want to make sense of your business, please also understand the geopolitical risks, the strategic risks that you face in your business. You cannot say that I'm a domestic player, because domestic scenarios are impacted by overseas trends as well. Whether you like it or not, and whether you wish it away or not, it is here to stay. You look at what is unfolding today in the Russia-Ukraine standoff. I'm absolutely astonished beyond words that the Western world, which egged on, which provoked this war, and I don't want to use this public platform, didn't figure out that the gas and energy supplies would get impacted in a few months and would throw out of gear the entire calculations for all the storied, legendary, Pentagon, you have the State Department in the US and in the European Union, etc. They didn't understand that when you have an overt reliance of 70% of energy needs of Europe being met by Russia, and if you take on a challenger like this, and you know what catastrophic consequences are unfolding, this is where I'm trying to say risk management. Please understand issues strategically, because you need to think beyond. And chickens are coming home to roost for the Western world. It's only a matter of time, I think, before there is greater chaos. Already there are signs of recession setting, extremely disturbing. The US is predicted to get into recession as it is said. 2 quarters of, negative growth in an economy is, in economic parlance, known as recession. Well and truly, recession is looming large on global trade. And this does not augur well for the next 1.5 to 2 years. It's going to be a fairly painful period. If you see most industries, and I wish, I'm proven wrong, and most of the pundits are proven wrong here, but that is where we are headed for. That only sort of supplements and buttresses the point that I made about some of these elements. Of course, all is not gloomy, and I'm not being a doomsday sayer, naysayer here. There is a great deal of, solace, silver lining in the fact that India is one country today which stands out in terms of the growth it is clocking. In complete contrast to countries which are either negative or, marginal in terms of 1 or 2% GDP growth rates, India is clocking around 6 to 6.5%. This is not a very patriotic statement, but this is a ground reality. Now, we probably are getting some things right, but the fact is that, again, a point I'll finally conclude here by saying that please look at some of the emerging trends where the economies will look like in about 2040, 2050. You might say, who has prophesied the world? Nobody has got the crystal ball to gaze and identify what the world will be like. But honestly, if institutions, multilateral institutions like the IMF and the World Bank can say with authority that come 2040 and beyond, the entire matrix of the top 10 economies that we look today is going to change very dramatically. The US will slip down to probably the 3rd or the 4th position. The China will call the shots, assuming, of course, China gets its act together in the next 10 years. Of course, nothing can be said about that country. India is going to be number 2, and possibly by 2050, India will probably be leading the pack. And would you believe it, economies such as Indonesia, Mexico, Vietnam are going to be in the top 10. So this is where you need to understand where your business opportunities lie in the next 20 to 30 years from now. If you're able to foresee those trends, and if you're able to direct your business in capturing those markets and smartly building towards that, that's all I wanted to say. I think it's too monotonous, and a pleasant occasion like this, when there's an award ceremony, you want to celebrate, there's champagne possibly waiting outside, and there's some great food to be served. So many congratulations to all the award winners. Please keep up the good work. As it's usually said, it's very easy to scale the Everest. Once you start becoming breathless because of lack of oxygen. And so the point is, when you reach a certain ascendancy, the true spirit of sustainability of the company lies in its ability to keep going at that level, or possibly even going better. And this also should be a motivation for all those who have missed out, and hopefully they make it next time around. Compliments to Littoral Communications for their first edition of the awards, and I wish all of you the very best, personally and professionally. Thank you so much for your patient hearing and for inviting me. Thank you, and have a great evening. Thank you.